You're one of those people that follows or tries to follow the darkest of possibilities in the human mind. If you do, or if you're interested in any of that, or possibly maybe you just want to try to understand how someone can get as dark as, well, we see some of the figures that we see today. Well, that's what this episode of We The Patriots Podcast is going to be all about today. I'm your host, Sal Assante, and today we're going to dive pretty deep into the world of pedophilia, sex trafficking, and the porn industry, and try to get a grasp on one of the, like I said, one of the darkest and most brutal forms of really slavery that has come into play in the modern day in 2025. Yeah, today's not going to be a fun episode, but it is going to be quite an enlightening one, if I do say so myself. Sit back, enjoy the podcast any which way you feel, whether you want to watch this on YouTube, you want to go click this on and just listen to it over on Spotify, Apple, wherever you might want to get your podcast, and try to follow along with me as I dive into, again, one of the deepest and darkest parts of humanity. Let's get right into it. So today we are looking at sex slavery in every way, shape, and form, whether you're talking about pure sex slavery, you're talking about pedophilia, child manipulation, manipulation in all fronts, and what the International Labor Organization estimates this conglomeration of sex trafficking as is that 4.8 million people across the world are sexually exploited globally. 1 in 5 are children, about 20%. And if you look at it on a grander scale, the crisis is bigger than most wars that are happening around the world right now. Today, what we're going to try to focus on is we're going to nail down some famous names that you may or may not have heard of, politicians, celebrities, fame on every corner, and maybe some hidden cases that you never heard of, and really try to expose how the world of porn and drugs are actually the forefront of this kind of epidemic of really moral failings that we have as human beings. How I want to start today is, what is sex trafficking? It's a pretty heavy term. What is it actually? As the UN defines it, it's exploitation through force, fraud, or coercion for commercial sex, and for any involvement of kids. No coercion, no proving of that has to even be applied because kids can't consent. So, of course, as you can imagine, the muddying of the waters is going to come when you are talking about adult anybody, females, males, doesn't really matter. That's where coercion is going to come into play. You're talking about a minor, when you're talking about someone who cannot consent, as it is termed by the law, which is an interesting thing to say. If we take a step back, we look at what the state law says here in the United States, and it's very different around the world. But as I know it in the United States, different states have different ages of consent. It can really muddy the waters when you have a national case or even an international case, because someone may be abiding by a different set of laws and still get trapped in something called pedophilia. Now, the pedophilia that I'm talking about today is going to be a little bit separate than just the, I guess you call it, it's a famous word for it, I guess, is statutory rape. We're not really going to be talking about too much of those fringe cases. What we're going to be talking about is trafficking on a grander scale. And again, this is going to be, it gets pretty dirty and gets pretty dark. Just in terms of money, just so you guys have an idea, about $150, $150 would be nice if it was that low. $150 billion a year worldwide is estimated to be the yearly flow of money into sexual exploitation. In the U.S., you have somewhere around the range of 20,000 scales reported since 2007. That's just since 2007. We're looking at about an 18-year period, which is pretty appalling. And that really, if you think about it, and we'll talk about porn a little later, it's really just the tip of the iceberg when you talk about reported cases, because so many of the people that are tied into this scheme of sexual exploitation either are unaware of their circumstances, possibly it's drug induced, and yeah, it gets really murky. And again, this is one of the darkest sides of humanity for a reason. And one thing to keep in mind here is that it's definitely not a third world problem. It's not something that us as Americans, if you are American listening to this podcast, it's not something that you can think of that it's not on your doorstep, because it's happening in nearly every city. Could be happening at a massage parlor down the road from you. Could be happening to people in your family that you don't even know, and it could be being perpetrated by people in your family that you just don't know are part of this problem. So it spreads to every corner of the world, whether you like it or not. And the biggest part of it is confronting. I remember for us growing up, when I talk about us, I talk about my generation. It was kind of a well-known thing, and honestly turned into more of a comical thing. It shouldn't be that way, but a lot of times the way that you get through some really deep wounds, especially talking about things like coercion, trauma, is you get over it with humor. And I do think that it had spread to a humorous part of life where, a very famous example, and still is today, very highly made fun of, is the fact that Catholic priests are so ingrained in this issue. And a lot of it had to do with the exploitation of young boys, altar servers. Now, really, that again is just another tip of a different iceberg where you're realizing that this is a global phenomenon, one that affects realistically everybody in some way, shape, or form. And it is really a sick side of the human mind to think that there are people that participate in this entire scheme on a grand scale. So as we take a little bit of a deeper look, about 71% of trafficking victims are women and girls. 25% on the whole are children. That could be male or female. And the honest truth is that this is all coming from a demand. This demand is coming from somewhere. You can look at most religious texts actually try to mandate that relations cannot happen between a fully grown adult and a child. Now, that doesn't mean that they still don't do it. And obviously, as I pointed out already with the Catholic Church, doesn't mean that people in positions of power won't try to still take advantage of situations where they have the power over somebody. And that again is kind of just speaks to the darkness. Who's involved? I want to start with the names that you know. And today I'm not going to be focusing on someone like Epstein, Trump, Clinton, Prince Andrew. I'm not going to be talking about a lot of these people because the sad reality is that it seems like a lot of the information specifically tied to Epstein, and when you think about Epstein, Jeffrey Epstein, if you don't know, all the information that's being hidden, whether, for good reasons or bad, more than likely I can imagine bad, it implicates a lot of people. When it comes to the Epstein thing, you are talking about people like Clinton, Trump, Prince Andrew. And this is where all of the allegations stem from. So if we don't have rock solid information that is pointing to Epstein's whole operation, then we are not actually going to be able to properly diagnose the problem when it comes to our elites. I am going to sidestep that kind of question. I'm not going to talk too much about them. Not going to talk too much about the Tate brothers being introduced, even though that is something that fumes and boils my blood. I'm not going to talk too much about it because, again, a lot of that stuff is information that's being suppressed as we speak. We may not learn the truth about this for decades. We may not learn about the truth for Epstein, Tate brothers, the entirety of the whole book that may be brought down by Epstein. We might not learn about this until our lives are over. And I talk about our lives, my generation could be even the next generation down. It's a sad thing to say, but honestly speaking, it is really detrimental. And I think not understanding the effect that we're having on the further upcoming generations is one of the biggest problems here. And when you're talking about set in stone, people who absolutely did what was alleged, they have been found guilty. I want to start with a few different names that you may or may not have heard of. One of them being a U.S. House Speaker, former U.S. House Speaker, Dennis Hastert. He was convicted in 2015, hiding payments to silence a boy that he molested as a coach. There was about 4 victims, aged 14 to 17, and one of the biggest problems that comes with his story is that, of course, his rank in the government, the power that he held, delayed the justice for his victims. And that's a common theme that we'll find throughout the day as I start to move on. Another one that I think a lot of people may have heard of is Anthony Weiner, former U.S. representative, I believe, out of New York. He was caught sexting a 15-year-old in 2016, and he was convicted, served 21 months for digital grooming. And the honest fact is that the online world of putting so many people in connection with each other, it does serve some good purposes, makes us a more globally conscious society, sure, but it also brings dangers of the worst parts of the world. And that, again, I'm not talking about that there's bad parts of the world, third world problems. No, no. The worst types of people have access to everybody in the world. And if you are that bad and that desperate and the demand is high enough, you will go searching for your next victim in any way possible. And a lot of times these sick individuals are very, very good at manipulating people online or getting information that people don't even want to be spread just because they are skilled enough in something like hacking. It is a very, very sick thing to think about. And again, Anthony Weiner, being a representative, had access to things that we don't even know about. When you're thinking about people who are deemed, this is an interesting thing. When you think about, the milk carton, the old milk carton thing, kid gone missing, alert the authorities and whatnot. About 1 in 7 of these people that were deemed runaways are actually victims of a sex crime or were sexually trafficked. And it's appalling. It's appalling to think about. You're somewhere in the, 15 to 20% range of people getting trafficked when it was simply thought that these people ran away from home. And when you look into the issue of sex trafficking further, a lot of times what a sex trafficker is looking for someone who is really running an operation, they're looking for a broken home. They're looking for a weak father figure. They're looking for a mother who doesn't pay attention to their kid at the park. And these might have been, things taken for granted previously, or things that kind of get overlooked and glossed over, saying, oh, that's obvious, but it's the truth. And when you have this whole society that's living on their phones and, allowing, think about that playground example, and just allowing your kid to go have fun and frolic around, and you're going to be on your phone, reading the news, catching up on your work emails, whatever it might be, not paying your 100% attention to your own child. Well, that is the perfect scenario for a trafficker to grab a hold of your child. And it really is. It's scary to think about. Another U.S. representative, Mark Foley, resigned in 2006 after messaging teen pages. Now, you got to think about pages like Facebook, all over Twitter now. You have Spaces. There's nothing stopping these people from putting on a persona that is obviously not linked to who they really are in real life. Playing the role of a 15-year-old, playing the role of a 12-year-old in a chat room. I think about back when I used to play games online, be like Xbox back in like 2007, 8, 9. And, we were getting shouting matches, cursing matches, threats being sent all over the place. And I'm talking to people who are 25, 30, possibly 40, 50 years old. You have no idea who you're actually talking to. And it can get very scary very quickly. And nowadays, the ability for people who are all online all the time to have access to your information, whether you are putting it out there or not, is something that really needs to be taken into consideration, whether you are a parent or possibly just partaking in this stuff yourself. If you're not properly protecting yourself or not putting guardrails around what you're surrounding yourself or your kids with, you are running the risk of falling right into these predators' hands. And that is the sad reality of today. Now, politicians realistically are just a start, and something that we've seen as came up recently, which is another trial that's ongoing, but it seems pretty damning what's going on. As we saw the arrest of P. Diddy, a total raid of his home, finding all these things. And you look back at the amount of people that were connected to that, it's going to be just as deep, if not deeper, than the Epstein files, if they ever do come out. And think about all these celebrities that are tied up in stuff like this. You have someone like R. Kelly, who's convicted in 21 for sex trafficking, racketeering. Girls as young as 13 were drugged, filmed, controlled for decades. A one-man trafficking ring that was run by R. Kelly. Everybody likes to make fun of the piss memes. They like to piss on girls, but it was a lot deeper than that. It was girls who had really no autonomy for themselves and could not make any of these decisions under their own will. That's the type of person that we're dealing with. Think about Roman Polanski, who he was a film director, if you don't know who that is, drugged, filmed, rapes with a 13-year-old girl in 1977, fled justice, and with her coming out, more accusers came out, and the sad thing is that Hollywood still honors him to this day. At the end of the day, what you got to think of with situations like R. Kelly or Polanski is that when you become famous enough, you will have your defenders, regardless of what disgusting things you did, whether it comes to a murder, a rape, child molestation. And unfortunately, these people are the worst of the worst. And I'll sidestep that before I continue here. I don't know if you guys know my stance really on pedophilia, so I'm just going to lay it out on the line here. I don't really think there is much more of a disgusting individual than someone who's going to take advantage of the power dynamic between an adult and a child. I think that if you are a pedophile, if you have pedophilic tendencies, if you are to act on those in any way, shape, or form, you are at the bottom of society. Talk about murderers, talk about rapists. I really do think that you are below those types of people, and that's saying something. That is, if you are taking out from that context that I am supporting somebody who murders somebody or I'm supporting a rapist, that could not be further from the truth. What I'm stating is that I believe that there is a lower rung there as a child predator. And I do believe that those people belong in that lowest rung of society. I don't think that you get much worse as a human being of not only having those tendencies, because there are some dark thoughts that you cannot stop. It's actually Dostoevsky who wrote a book, and one of the better books I've read, actually, Crime and Punishment, and basically follows the entire logic train of someone who is thinking about committing a murder and follows through on it. So these thoughts, I imagine Dostoevsky, you don't know whether to pin a possible murder on him. You never know. But you don't have to commit the crime that you're thinking of to think about it. Someone who acts, the person who acts on a pedophilic tendency, the person who is going to be the child predator, that is the worst of the worst. And here's another caveat to this. If you're one of those people who thinks that a person who's enjoying child pornography is any better than the person committing the sin themselves, I want you to take a step back and recognize what they're actually doing. Right? Watching porn is one thing, and we'll get into the porn industry a little bit further down the road here in the show. Watching child porn, participating in that, what are you doing as that person if you are that individual? Well, you're sanctioning that event. You're sanctioning someone raping a child. And you're okay with that. You're not reporting it. You're actually taking it and using it for your own dark fantasy of getting off to a child being raped. You are just as bad. If that is you, I hope that none of my audience is that person. You are just as bad of a human being as the person perpetrating the crime. And that's how I feel about it. So now that that's out on the line, I do want to continue here in the narrative. Now, another person that may or may not be forefront in everybody's mind would be Jared Fogle. If you don't remember the name here, that is the former Subway, what do you want to call him, head of their marketing tactics for years. Was the person who lost over 100, maybe even over 200 pounds by eating Subway, which was ridiculous in and of itself. That person got convicted as a child predator. I believe is still behind bars to this day. And what a disgusting person you have to be to take advantage of the fame that he got to the level that he did. Again, these cases of famous people are really not hard to find, and you do not need someone on the Epstein level to find the amount of people that could be implicated. Now, when you want to think further about someone like an Epstein and who they implicated, well, think about, as I just said, how disgusting of a human being I think you are, and I think that most of society would agree with me, at least partially. If you don't believe that child trafficking is the worst of the worst, you at least think it belongs with the worst other crimes, like a murder, like a rapist. This type of activity, if you are partaking in child trafficking or child sex, slavery, realistically, or trafficking, sex trafficking in general, even if they are of age, you have some pretty serious blackmail material. And that is the thought, if you want to get into the conspiratorial view of what the business of Jeffrey Epstein is and how he became as rich as he had, how he had so many properties, was that he had so much blackmail on such serious individuals that he was able to live a lavish lifestyle just by supplying these people the victims, getting these people to perpetrate heinous acts on these victims and possibly record them, or in other ways make it concrete so that he held it over their heads. And you have to think about someone like an R. Kelly, someone like a P. Diddy, who has such a wide net, so many people affected by them, that you can only wonder how many of our biggest stars, people that we idolize today, how many of those people are partaking in things like child sex, sex slavery, trafficking in general, could be child trafficking. It is a very disturbing thought. Now, this is where you need to kind of wonder, Is fame really a perk of being extremely successful in whatever field? Maybe you're an athlete, maybe you are in the film industry, a director, an actor, or maybe you're a politician. Fame is not just a perk. Fame is not just you being able to sign autographs for tons of money each. It's also a tool that is being used by these extremely successful individuals in order to get what they want. And they are servicing that need that they have in their head, that they need to display that dominance, really, at the end of the day, is what it is, over an individual who has no agency over themselves. We get further into this. You have to look at, and I mentioned it a few times already, but we're going to dive deep here. You have to look at the industry that is on the face, and that's porn. Porn has affected a wide range of people, not only in my life, but I'm sure in everybody's life here. When you look at the statistics, about 58% of Americans have viewed pornography at least one time. 27% have watched it in the last month. 1 in 3 Americans actually seek it out. Something around 11% of people watch it daily, and about 84%, this is the good side, 84% believe that child pornography should be illegal. Now, the scary part of that is that 16% of the population believes it should be legal. How those people are thinking that way, well, I would love to know, because it is such an infectious disease. As you can imagine, 11% of our entire population, you got to think in a country of 360 million people. It's a significant amount of people. You're talking about in the millions of people that watch porn daily. Sad thought. It's a very sad thought to think about. It's about, globally, it's about a $100 billion industry, about $12 billion in the US, and this is about 2020. Take those figures, add a little bit of inflation into them. Trafficking hotline actually named porn to be the top feeder system for their cases, or why they were receiving calls. So many of them came from porn. Now, how this actually goes about happening, you have to imagine what the porn industry does. It's taking advantage of women, in most cases, who do not have a better way of making a life for themselves. Maybe they have a stained record, maybe they were a previous criminal, maybe they have drug problems already. And you have to imagine that these people are being coerced. They're being told to do acts that they may or may not be comfortable with. And if they do not perform the acts being asked, well, they'll just be fired and they'll go find another girl or another person. Another really sad part of the porn industry is what happens to males. Obviously, this is the lesser talked about part of porn, but it's still a pretty significant portion, is that male actors do not get paid nearly at the scale that female actors do. And that's also keeping in mind that you are a female selling your body online. You are a actor. If you are a man, you are an actor selling your body online. You're still not really paid very well, all things told. But that aside, if you want to be higher paid as a male, generally speaking, they're going to push you to do gay porn. And you have to think about the amount of morals that you may be giving up on in order to pursue something like that. And again, I'm not trying to get into the argument of whether being gay is moralistic. It's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that someone may have a core value that they are not a gay person, but whether circumstance in life or monetary situation has led them into doing pornography as an actor, they're going to be pushed to do gay porn if they want to make more money. You're not going to make more money by having sex with more highly falutin women. You're going to have a better chance actually making more money doing gay porn. And that's just another side of how crazy this industry can get. Now, imagine if you're that person who is pushing down your morals in order to make ends meet, make more money. And a lot of times what coincides with that is drug use. Doesn't matter if you're a female, a male, there is massive drug use rates among porn stars. And it is an industry where people die young. It is a very scary thought that, if it is your daughter, if it is your son who gets into this industry, that they may never get out. And them never getting out may actually consist of them dying as being a part of this industry. It could be related to one of the scenes that they shoot. They could get themselves involved with some people that, don't have the highest moral standards in general, or it could be drug induced. And that's very scary to think about. We'll talk about drugs a little bit further down the line, a little deeper. But you also have to think about a website like Pornhub. So if you're not aware, there's been a lot of recent legislation that's been cracking down on websites like Pornhub, but Pornhub specifically because they are the most used website, I believe, in the United States and possibly globally. And for a long time, you didn't have to have any sort of verification. You could just go and upload any video of you having sex or someone else having sex, and there would be no problem. And as long as you got enough views, you got enough of the ad revenue, you could make a lot of money from just posting a random sex video. It could have been a random sex video that you pulled off someone's phone. And now, again, recently there's been a lot of legislation cracking down on that. But that being said, it's still not perfect, of course. And again, I know way too many people that have been sucked into this problem of pornography, and they may not even know that they could be possibly watching a minor. They could be watching someone being completely taken advantage of that they have no idea about. And in most cases where a minor's involved, excuse me, in most cases where a minor's involved, there may actually be a case of someone being taken against their will, being held captive, being a true sex slave. And this is the case. Well, obviously, you are aiding and abetting, as a viewer of these videos, you are aiding and abetting some terrible, terrible things. And you are no better, again, than any of these people perpetrating crime. I actually have a little bit of a remembrance here. There was a girl, I don't know how many of you people, listeners out there, are familiar with the website Omegle. But I remember Omegle was basically probably still alive to some degree or another today. Maybe it has a different website name, whatever. Basically what it is a random video chat. You randomly video chat with, it could be anybody from across the globe. And I remember a girl getting taken advantage of when I was in high school, where she had set herself up. Somebody was masturbating, egging her on to masturbate with them. And the person on the other side of the screen recorded it and uploaded it to Pornhub. There was no restriction, obviously. They were able to do whatever they wanted. And for a time, and I'm sure even to this day, it ruined the girl's life. She had to go through many lengths to get this video taken down. It spread all throughout the school. People wanted to see it, wanted to see this girl naked. And she had no ability to say, I don't want that uploaded. It was done without her knowing. And it was such a sad thing to see, realistically. I feel bad for this girl to this day. It is a terrible thing to happen, but just imagine that circumstance being broadcast out all over the world. That is just one little instance that hit home for me. Think about the amount of girls specifically, but really underage people that could be taken advantage of every single day in situations like this where they don't even know who they're talking to. Someone's taking advantage of them, uploading them onto the internet when they think that they are just having a, generally speaking, a normal interaction to them, especially as online things go. It is just crazy to think about. It is crazy to think about how the mind of certain people may be running. People like Kelly, Watkins, Fogel, they actually, Fogel I don't know about, but Kelly, Watkins for sure, made porn with their victims. And it is not a giant leap in logic to think that many of these people were just utilizing the word porn essentially to get away with what they were doing. Possibly, think about someone in R. Kelly's situation, putting up a lavish lifestyle for someone and essentially saying that this is how you're getting paid. And in reality, this person is being taken advantage of, being fed all the drugs that they need in order to not really fully understand the decisions that they're making. And this goes on, as we can all imagine, on levels that we don't even know about. You also have to think about that one of the things that needs to be mentioned when you're talking about sex slavery is that this is a pretty underground thing. Most people do not want you to find out that they're involved with it. That kind of makes sense. It's a pretty dirty thing to do. But anything to do with sex trafficking, child sex, of course, is going to be extremely, extremely hidden from the public view, as best as possible anyway. And so we can only guess how deep this problem runs. And if I had to guess, it's far worse than we even can imagine. And we only see, really, again, to call back to the intro there, a little tip of the iceberg about how bad this problem can really be for, those that are involved in the porn industry. We already talked about it as a multi-billion-dollar industry yearly in the United States, but even thinking about it worldwide, I think about places that don't have as good regulations as the United States. You think about China, you think about a lot of Asia, realistically Asia, most of the Middle East. There could be operations being sprung up all over the place that we don't even know about. And that is a really sad reality to think about. And a thing to remember about porn is that it is really not neutral. It is a hub for trafficking. It blurs the lines of consent And again, as we call back to people maybe doing things that they do or do not want to be involved in, it's a very serious thing to think about. And the biggest thing is that what it does to the viewers that are involved. Now, of course, the people being trafficked, they are in a terrible situation, and I do not want to put them down as not being victims, because of course they are. But we also have to keep in mind who's consuming this. I remember my first introduction to porn was probably when I was about 12 or 13 years old, and not understanding what kind of psychological damage that did to me. It took me a long time to really come to grips with what I was dealing with. And as it became a slight addiction to myself and trying to peel back away that addiction, a lot of it, what it came down to and getting to a point of understanding was trying to come to grips with the fact that this is not real sex. And that is what we have to understand here. I hope my viewers here are understanding is that when you're talking about pornography, you are not talking about real sex. In almost every case, there is some level of coercion that was involved, whether it was coercing someone to take less money than they deserve. And realistically, I'm of the belief that you cannot sell yourself for enough money in order to make it worth it, but that's beside the point. Whether they were coerced to take drugs involved, whether they were coerced to do an activity that they were not really comfortable with, or whether they were coerced to do it in the first place, is all something that we need to keep in mind as viewers of this podcast. And if you are a pornography viewer, to understand that the problem that comes along with pornography is that it is a very deep issue. And most of the people that are involved, male, female, or anybody realistically, is being taken advantage of by the production company, by the directors. And it is all a giant, in my opinion, sex trafficking ring. Now, the only thing that can really be claimed as a giant binder for all this is drugs. Traffickers are very prone to having their victims addicted to drugs. It could be as serious as heroin, meth. It could be something as simple as marijuana if it is an enticement deal. We will get you all the marijuana that we want to get you as long as you shoot enough videos for us. Think about things like that, right? You also have to think about people who are underage and being manipulated with drugs as well. These people are not only being force-fed this terrible relationship with sex, but on top of it, being forced into addictions that they have no idea what they're even being addicted to. Another scary thought to have. There's a lot of people that are going to make up stories, tell themselves lies in order to get over their trauma. A lot of girls, what they will say, as there was a lot of examples here with R. Kelly, girls got drugs in order to endure it. And a lot of porn actresses, actually, if they do make it out of the business, will admit to the same, that a lot of it came down to drug use and making sure that what they like to say is, I'm sure they don't like to say anything, but if they were to term it, they are numbing their brain to the real effects that the porn is having on them, whether it's talking about all the sex, whether it's talking about the manipulation, however you want to term it. They're using drugs to cover up the fact of what they're doing. Now, about 70% of trafficking survivors report substance abuse issues that coincide with the trafficking. And that's, of course, the ones that are being honest about it. You never know the ones that aren't telling the truth. And the biggest problem is that when you get them hooked on something like heroin, you get them hooked on something like meth, there is not an easy way out from that. I think about getting, I believe I've talked about it in the past, but if not, I will definitely try to do a bigger show on this, the opiate problem. Getting hooked on something like heroin can only lead down a dark path. I've seen many people and family members included that got hooked into this sick thing that is opioids. And what it can lead down to is a road to what we now have as fentanyl. And we all know, I think, the damage that something like fentanyl is causing our country. But that all starts with something as simple as this, coercing someone or someone getting coerced into the porn industry, into sex slavery at the end of the day, and trying to numb their senses with something like heroin and not realizing what they're getting themselves into. Now, Polanski also drugged his victim. Larson drugged his groomed online, and a lot of times drugs is what comes in the aftermath. And a lot of times this is kind of like a handbook that's followed, and the sick thing to think about is that, again, this being an underground thing, a lot of times there is networking that is done between the traffickers, between the people that are perpetrating these disgusting crimes, and a lot of times they share their methods. It's what you have to think about. Think about, when the serial killers were running rampant all over the United States in the previous century. And a lot of them actually we're following each other's methods. We're trying to basically take pages out of the books of each other's way of doing in order to not get caught, or in order to have a more ample supply of victims. And the same thing happens in the sex industry, and it is vile. Now, the problem with drugs is that they're not really enabling the issue. They're actually, more than likely, they're what's holding it together. A lot of times what you're doing is getting the victim to stay when they would otherwise leave. And if you're able to get that victim hooked into a long-term stay, your profit is just going to go up and you can get more people roped in. You imagine that you're getting victims to have their friends brought into this for the chance to get drugs, chance to get access to very famous people, not realizing what they just hooked themselves into. And again, we talk back to a point that I brought up earlier, which is the people who were brought into this unbeknowingly, and as well that you also have people who are claimed as runaways when in reality they were coerced into a trafficking. Now if we take a little bit of a backline look, we look at people that you may never have heard of. There's some pretty dark stuff that happens. If you ever heard of the name Mark Detrow, this is someone who's convicted in 2004, kidnapped, raped, and killed girls all through the ages of 8 to 19 in his own house, basically created a dungeon. And it's not well known in the United States. Something of a crazy statistic is that Europe sees something like 140,000 trafficking victims yearly. And a lot of it kind of calls back to what Dutroux did, and he was based out of Belgium. So, of course, people in the United States are not going to be as well acquainted with his case. Someone like Gary Glitter, convicted in 1999 for child porn and in 2006 for abusing girls 10 to 11 in Vietnam. His fame kind of went away. He used to be a singer in the UK. Fame went away, but the crimes didn't stop. As you can see, convicted in 99 for child porn and was clearly released with enough time to start abusing young girls. And a lot of times, here's the sad thing too, when you look back on child porn and how I mentioned that you're no better if you're a consumer of child porn than you are the people that are perpetrating. A lot of times, there's a lot of interlocking issues there where someone who is the consumer of child porn is also a child trafficker. That is the bottom line. The bottom line is that although they being the perpetrators of this or the consumers of child porn, they may want to shove it off as, oh, I only consumed the porn, I never did the act myself. A lot of times that's a lie. A lot of times that's not telling the full truth. And another thing that also needs to be talked about is how many people become homosexual because of a early abuse that they actually endured due to an older man abusing them when they were a child. This is a very common thing. If you remember back to someone by the name of Milo Yiannopoulos, this is someone who's kind of faded out into the abyss, I guess you could say, of online personas. But this is someone who was very famous in the conservative wing for quite some time. I want to say between the years of 2010 and maybe 2018, probably a little earlier than 2018. But I remember he wrote a very famous book. There were many people who championed him because he was a gay conservative. And when he actually described it, how he became gay was that he was abused as a young child. And of course, a lot of the darker comments, racist stuff that came out is disgusting on top of it. But it's something that needs to be recognized is that there is a lot of the homosexual community that was created. And when I say created, I mean people who were really made to be gay based on an abuse at the hands of an elder person when they were younger. And this all kind of ties in. A lot of this does relate back to, in some way, shape, or form, relating to drug use. You think about someone like Nathan Larson, who was convicted in 2021, flew a 12-year-old out for abuse. He ran pedophile sites, and he was basically a nobody with a truly trafficking mind. You think about how dark and deep someone can get into this. It's when they believe, or maybe they do have the ability to create a business out of this, and then they go ahead and do it, creating online sites, allowing for abuse that is really unknown to us. I'll call us normal people, people who are not affected by this really mental disease that ravages people and changes the way that they view the world. And it is really a power and dominance point of view that takes over these people who are trafficking people. Now, as I try to close this up, I've talked, I think, long enough. I do want you guys, if you made it this far, to recognize that this is an extension of a previous episode that I did, which was modern day slavery. And this is sex slavery, child trafficking, trafficking in general, is the most easily pointed at example of today's day and age in having slavery. It is. You could look at cobalt mines in the Congo and point at some very similar things to the origination of the United States and many places in the Americas and the islands. But stepping aside from that, and that being something that deserves quite a bit of attention in and of itself, the most obvious example, the example that is on our doorstep, as I mentioned earlier today, what's around us here in the United States, what's around us all around the world. If you are a listener from some other country, I thank you for listening to the show. You probably are also just as affected, if not more so, by these problems that I'm mentioning here that are, again, all along our doorstep. And at the end of the day, us becoming a globalized world is giving these perpetrators of these heinous crimes a bigger network to deal with. Now, pedophilia is not an isolated issue. It is the gateway to a larger trafficking ring, whether you're talking about people with power, fame, talking about the porn industry, or talking about drugs and their dealers and the rings that have to do with that. At the end of the day, you're looking at a $150 billion machine that enslaves somewhere around 4.8 billion people. Whether you're talking about Hastard's Hush Money to Watkins fan base abuse, it is all about having the access and the ability to silence the victims. Porn normalizes a lot of this stuff, and drugs at the end of the day is what holds it all together and makes it able to be pushed down. I think about people not being able to speak their mind or not being able to be taken seriously because they're on drugs. That is a very commonplace misconception that people who do drugs do not have the agency to speak on their own behalf. You got to remember that 1 in 5 trafficking victims are kids, and the porn industry in the United States is a generation of about $12 billion. And at the end of the day, 70% of these survivors are fighting a drug addiction problem on top of them trying to get out of this really disgusting industry. This is what porn does to people. It rots from the inside out. It changes your whole perspective on life, sex, and human interaction at the end of the day. And God forbid you were talking about child porn. Your inability to recognize the power dynamics of what goes on between a adult and a child will start to change the way you view the world in total. Now, what I want you to do is, as a listener, and if you made it this far in the show, rethink the way that you view porn. Rethink the way that you view the entire industry of sex. Whether you're talking about legalized prostitution, pornography, or you're talking about the darker stuff, child porn, sex slavery, trafficking. The real honest truth is that all this stuff ties together. It's all one issue. And the issue is that we have a massive problem all across the globe when it comes to sex slavery. And I will use that term sex slavery in order to point at all of these different issues that we're looking at. Rethink the way that you look at porn. Rethink the way that maybe you want to view it as a normal thing in society, because realistically, when you look back on it, yeah, sure, you could point back to magazines or carvings into a stone. That's not pornography. Pornography, and what it has become, is a live depiction of abuse, in most cases, coercion. And at the end of the day, it is really no better than you being the perpetrator of a crime yourself. And if you are seriously talking about something like child pornography, and you happen to be one of those people, do yourself a favor and do the world a favor. Turn in the people that you got these videos from, hand in the materials that you have, and get some justice for the victims that you have aided in their putting down. I really don't have too much more to say on this. It is a disgusting thing, but I think it needs to be talked about. I want to thank you for tuning in today. My name is Sal Assante with We The Patriots Podcast. I hope to catch you guys next week on an episode where I believe I will be doing a little bit of a deep dive again into what's going on with Israel, because it has to be talked about. Until next week, catch you guys then.
I wish I were the fucking state. I wanna be something, not nothing. Trapped inside my dream and I'm running away from these demons. But the feeling's so good, I'ma keep dreaming.